Professor Bhugra, why is mental illness a global challenge?
I think one of the things we have to recognize is that mental illness is very common. Data from Europe shows that anything between 1 in 6 and 1 in 4 people in their adulthood will develop mental illness, which means that every family in the land is going to be affected directly or indirectly. In addition, the burden because of mental illness is much greater than that of cardiovascular disease and of cancer. So it's absolutely important that we invest in managing and treating mental illness. We also know that by 2020, depression will be the commonest illness in the world. So we need to start preparing for interventions and management now.
What are the key developments in the field of psychiatry in the recent years, and has there been much change?
There has been a lot of change because increasingly we are using therapies without therapists on people's mobile phones, on iPads and on other mobile instruments. But it's also, there's been a major change in the psychopharmacogenomics, which means that we can now, through gene maps and genomes, figure out who's going to respond to what dosage of medication, because some people are fast metabolizers, so they need higher dosages. Others are slow metabolizers and they need lower dosages. So that, in addition, changes due to globalization and urbanization means that people are becoming more and more stressed because of overcrowding, poverty, unemployment. And in addition, we also need to recognize that we are beginning to understand more about the brain and beginning to understand neurocognition of emotions as to whether emotions affect our thinking affects our emotions, and how do we try and intervene with that.
In times of terrorism, what are the key challenges for the field of psychiatry and national security?
I think that the two things we need to remember, that not all terrorists have a mental disorder. People do these acts for all kinds of reasons, political, economic, status-wise. And the second one is that there will be a small proportion of people who are more vulnerable to being influenced by others. And certainly in terms of acculturation, people who migrate to second generation, third generation may find it more difficult to adjust, and that may be what may be contributing to their interests and attraction towards violent radicalization.
And in which ways can psychiatrists and their professional organizations respond to pressures, interests, and potential threats to professional ethics?
I think there are several issues that we need to bear in mind. First and foremost, as the WPA survey published last year showed, that out of the 193 countries we studied, only about 36% of the countries allow people with mental illness to either vote, get married, inherit property, make a will, or have any rights to employment. So one of the major challenges for psychiatry and psychiatrists is to advocate for our patients, to make sure that they are not discriminated against. And the only way we can get rid of discrimination is by changing the laws. And also that means is that people will engage with the services. And we need to make sure that there's enough funding, there's equal funding for mental illness as is for treating physical illness, as well as for research. We need equal emphasis on both mental and physical health.
You just mentioned poverty as one of the issues regarding mental illnesses. What can you tell us about the health gap?
I think if we look at social determinants of health, there is considerable evidence that if you are poor, you're unemployed, you're more likely to develop both physical and psychiatric disorders. And children who are brought up in poverty are more likely to be abused, and that means that in due course they will become the abusers and they will go through more problems. And therefore, one of the major challenges, as Professor Sir Michael Marmot has shown in his book, The Health Gap, that we need to be looking at how do we stop the cycle of poverty and mental illness. And it is, most people want to work, but they want to work with respect and they want to earn a reasonable amount of money. So we need to work with the policymakers, with the Department of Employment, with Department of Education, Department of Justice, and others to make sure that from the word go, people have sufficient resources, financial and emotional, so that we can stop the cycle of poverty and mental illness.
As the president of this year's World Psychiatric Congress, what do you hope visitors will take away from it?
As you know, the theme of the conference is Psychiatry in the 21st Century, context, controversies, and what we need to bear in mind is that it's also about contract with society. What is it the society expects from psychiatrists, and what do we expect in return? One of the major challenges is that quite often in many countries, psychiatry has become simply a tool to assess risk and manage risk rather than treating people with medication, with therapies, and supporting them through tough times and being their social advocate. So my hope is that from this conference people will go away feeling not only that they've learned about new research and new methods and new interventions, but also that they can be better advocates for social justice for people with mental illness.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.